Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. Since it's Christmas Eve, I'll take a break from doing sunshine sketches and read a couple of Christmas stories to you. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Our first story is from Russia, from a collection compiled in 1916 by Phebe A. Our second one will be more familiar to you, written in 1905 by William Sidney Porter, better known as O. Henry. Enjoy these stories, sit back, relax, and close your eyes, well, unless you're driving. Paulina's Christmas, a story of Russian life, adapted from Anna Robinson's Little Paulina. One day in Russia, there was a very heavy snowstorm. The snow was deep on the ground, and in the forest the branches of the trees bent under its weight. In this forest, a little girl was struggling along. There was no path for her to follow, for the snow covered all the paths. The little girl's name was Paulina. She was dressed in a long fur coat, and she wore a cap and mittens and gaiters of fur, so she looked more like a little furry animal than a little girl. She kept tramping along, not a bit afraid, but suddenly she heard a call in the distance. "Help, help," the call came. "Coming, coming," she called back. She went in the direction of the voice, and soon she saw a man making his way toward her. His dress was that of a peasant. "Will you please direct me out of this forest, little one?" he asked. "You probably know the paths about." No, I'm a stranger here," Paulina answered. "I live in Kiev. That is, I did live there, but I'm on my way to my father." "Where is your father?" asked the man. "He is in Siberia. They banished him." "Oh, but little one," said the stranger, "that is a terrible place for a child to go to. That frozen country where wicked people are sent." "Oh, yes, but my father is there, said Paulina. "Who is your father?" asked the man. The little girl was about to tell him. She noticed a look of interest on the stranger's face, so she said instead, "Did you say you'd lost your way in the forest? Do you live far from here?" "Yes, very far," he said. "I am lost and am nearly perishing from hunger and cold. How far is it to the next village?" "Oh, they told me it was some miles on," said the child, "but I will take you back to the woodsman's cottage where I spent the night. The woman is a kind-hearted person, and I'm sure she'll give you shelter." "That is kind of you, little one," said the stranger, "but you will be hindering your own journey if you do that." "I know that my father would want me to show a kindness, even though it did put me back some," Paulina said. "You must have a good father to give you such training. Why did the emperor send him into exile?" the stranger asked her. "Oh, my father had enemies who lied to the emperor, and there was no chance given to my father to explain. So the emperor sent him away to Siberia, and I'm trying to find my way there to him." While they walked through the forest, the stranger told Paulina about his own little daughter, who was expecting him to spend Christmas with her. At last they reached the woodsman's hut. The woman greeted them kindly, and while Paulina went into the other room to help her prepare the evening meal, the stranger was left warming himself by the fire and rocking the cradle. Once Paulina thought she heard voices, as if the stranger was talking to someone, but when she went back, she found him all alone, still warming his hands and rocking the cradle with his foot. That night the stranger slept on the floor in front of the fire. There was no other place for him, but he was glad to be safe from the storm outside. Early in the morning, the two started out through the forest again. They must hurry if they were to reach the next village before darkness fell. The storm had passed over, and the day was cold and clear, a beautiful winter's day. The little girl and the stranger reached the village on the other side of the forest early in the afternoon, and there before them they saw a beautiful sleigh drawn by 4 horses, and there were 4 servants standing near. "What a lovely sleigh!" exclaimed Paulina. "Yes, I wonder where they're going. I will ask them," the stranger said. He went near the men and spoke to them. "We are driving for our master to Igorhov," they said. "Why, that's where my daughter is. If I might only ride with you, I could spend Christmas with her. Tomorrow is Christmas Day, And, little one, you could spend Christmas with us too." "Oh, no," said Paulina. I could not take the time. I must hurry on to my father." But it would be lovely if we could only ride in this beautiful sleigh. You could spend the night with us, he said, and then you could send... You could spend the night with us. You could spend the night with us, he said, and then we could set you on your way, because you have been so kind to me. The servants were willing to let them ride in the beautiful sleigh, and soon they were speeding over the snow toward the great city. Once the stranger took a scarf from a pocket on the side of the sleigh and threw it about his neck. Paulina frowned and promptly placed it back in the pocket. It isn't right for you to touch anything in the sleigh. It belongs to someone else. I'm beginning to fear that you may not be an honest man, she said gravely. The stranger laughed at her, but did not take the scarf again. They sped on over the snow until, as darkness fell, they reached the city. Soon they entered a large courtyard, and the stranger took Paulina's hand and led her into a narrow passageway and up a small winding stairway. Where are you taking me? Asked Paulina. I feel almost sure now that you're not an honest man. I think you may even be a thief. The man laughed again. No, I am an honest man. You will believe me when you see my little daughter. I trusted you in the forest. Now you trust me. He led her into a large room, and they sat down upon a sofa. We will wait here until my daughter comes, he said. Soon the door opened, and a beautiful little girl, about as big as Paulina, came toward them. She looked puzzled when she saw the rough-looking man with the little girl. She went close to the stranger and looked into his face. What is my father? She cried, and threw her arms around his neck. But why are you dressed like a peasant? Has there been an accident? And who is this little stranger? The man took her on his lap and told her how his sleigh had been overturned in the storm and how he'd found his way to a peasant's hut where they'd given him dry clothes to put on, and he started out alone to find his way through the forest, and how he was nearly perishing with cold and hunger when this little girl had rescued him, and how, if it had not been for her, he would have died in the snow in the forest. He told her how the little girl was on her way to Serbia to find her father, and how they went to the woodsman's hut where a servant had found him, and how he had planned for the sleigh to meet them on the other side of the forest. Oh, Paulina interrupted him. Then there was somebody talking with you when we were preparing the evening meal? Yes, he said, and everything came out just as I had planned. And you know, my little daughter, this Paulina will not let me put my own scarf around my neck. She thought I was a thief. She is an honest little girl, but she will not tell me her name. She does not trust me. Oh, but why should I trust you, said Paulina, when you will not tell me who you are or anything about yourself? Do trust my father, said the beautiful little girl. I'm sure he can help you. He will tell you who he is soon, I know. Yes, little one, the stranger said. I know someone who could speak to the emperor about your father, and perhaps he could be pardoned. Please tell me your name, and then before you go away, I will answer any questions about myself, and you may ask me. Do tell my father, the little girl urged. Paulina threw her arms about the stranger's knees. Oh, if you could only get the emperor to pardon him. Oh, but I do not ask for a pardon. He has done nothing to be pardoned for. All that I ask is that he may have justice done him. My name is Paulina, and my father is Vladimir Betskoy. The stranger frowned, and then he whispered, There must be some mistake. He must be a good man to have such an honest little daughter. Then he said to Paulina, Do you believe now that I am an honest man, since you've seen my daughter? Oh, yes, indeed I do, said Paulina. You couldn't help being good and honest. Oh, she is so beautiful. I think her face is like what a queen should be. The stranger and his little daughter smiled, and the man said, Well, I believe that your father is an honest man since I've seen you, and I can tell you now I know your father will be pardoned. Oh, tell her, father, his daughter whispered. Tell the little Paulina who you are. He smiled. Until your father returns to you, little one, you must stay here, and I will be a father to you, as I am father to all the people of Russia, for I am the emperor. Just then the bells began ringing, and the voices outside began singing, for it was the beginning of Christmas morning. And Paulina said, This is the happiest Christmas morning I have ever known. End of story. That was a cute little tale, and hopefully the emperor saves her father. Next, we have a familiar classic by O. Henry, The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the house is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. Did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had the look of a beggar. In the vestibule below was a letter box into which no letter would go, an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and assuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat, above he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week didn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him. Something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a long pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now there were 2 possessions of the Jameses Dillingham Youngs, in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With the whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sifroni, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked at the Sifroni. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it at any of the stores, and she turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum watch fob chain, simple and chaste in design, proudly proclaiming in its value by substance alone and not by brazen ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love. Which is always a tremendous task, my friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. "If Jim doesn't kill me," she said to herself, "before he takes a second look at me, he'll see I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stairway down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying a silent little prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22, and to be burdened with the family. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter on the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the other sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went to him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim, laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone?" he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it on the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a little at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs, the set of hair combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "Oh, my hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with the reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how the fob looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep 'em a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men who had brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest, they are the Magi. End of story. A happy Christmas Eve, after all, for Jim and Della, and hopefully for you and your family too. Keep it simple. Remember the basics. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com, including my readings from last December of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now, and happy holidays.